Here's a story you've heard before. Another popular children's program has decided to go all in on left-wing indoctrination. And this time, as the Twitter account End Wokeness reports, it is the show CoComelon Lane, which is apparently a spin-off from the extremely popular CoComelon show. And the clip circulating on social media today is from episode 8 of the show's recently released first season. In the clip, we see a young boy, a character named Nico, dancing around in a dress and a tiara while his two gay dads look on approvingly. It's so on the nose that you would be forgiven for assuming that it must be like a parody, but it's not. Not intentionally anyway. Sadly, this is very real, and here it is. Watch.
Thing that we know about you, you love to get up and dance.
How about you break out those moves
for your two biggest fans?
Now, before we get to the biggest and most obvious problem here, I should say that CoComelon is one of the many shows that you should ban from your household. You should have already banned it simply because it's annoying and obnoxious and dumb. So we focus so much on the wokeness, and for good reason, but it's also worth noting just how bad most of these shows are, like even aside from the wokeness. Bad music, bad voice acting, bad singing, very bad, lifeless, ugly animation. The whole show looks and sounds like something that was generated in 12 seconds by AI. And that is basically how these shows are made, or that's how they will be made, at least in the very near future. And most parents will agree with my assessment of CoComelon. I don't know any parent. So CoComelon is one of the many shows that every parent complains about. And but then they'll say that they let their kids watch him anyway because they say that their kids love the show. Well, the problem is that, first of all, my kid wants to do it is never a sufficient reason for allowing them to do anything. And second, they don't actually love the show, okay? Nobody could love what you just saw there, not even a child. They don't love these shows. They are sedated by them. They are hypnotized, stupefied. That's why you've never seen a child, if you've ever seen a child like watching a show like this, or walked into a room when a kid's watching a show like this, you'll notice that the child isn't laughing or smiling or really reacting at all. They just sit there glassy-eyed, distracted by it. For whatever reason, stuff like this is compulsively watchable to a 3-year-old, but they don't love it, and they certainly aren't gaining anything from it. It's just that companies like Netflix specialize in churning out content that is compulsively watchable, stuff that will keep you sitting there slack-jawed and tranquilized. They produce that type of content for adults and kids alike. And that brings us to the most significant problem here, which is the message that the content is delivering. Whatever the message is, the child watching the show will be perfectly susceptible to it. Like Netflix has your child where they want him. Sitting there, eyes glued to the screen, passively absorbing whatever images and sounds and ideas emerge from it. And if your kid happened to be watching episode 8 of CoComelon Lane, then he would passively absorb the idea that it's normal for boys to dress like girls and that there's nothing strange about a child having two dads. It's not an accident, by the way, that this scene happens in episode 8. Because Netflix, they're strategic about this sort of thing. Like any groomer, it wants to lure parents into a false sense of security. Like parents will see the first couple episodes, everything looks pretty normal and harmless, not knowing that the gay dads and the cross-dressing kid is buried midway through the 8th episode. It's all very deliberate and very evil, and sadly very effective. Since Roe v. Wade was overturned, the left has lost their minds, making abortion their official sacrament. But the grassroots pro-life efforts, which are now more important than ever, are booming. Pro-lifers haven't gone away. In fact, they've only increased in number. One of the efforts that I support is 40 Days for Life, because they're changing hearts and minds in blue pro-abortion states. With 1 million volunteers in 1,600 cities, 40 Days for Life holds peaceful vigils outside abortion facilities. 40 Days for Life has opened a record number of locations since Roe was overturned, and they've grown in volunteers. This success has come with new unwanted attention from the DOJ. 40 Days for Life just made national headlines because they're suing the DOJ on behalf of their volunteer Mark Houck, who had his house raided by the FBI. They're going on offense against our compromised FBI and DOJ. You can help them fight their ongoing legal battles and pursue free speech for their volunteers, including Mark Houck, by giving a tax-deductible gift of any amount at 40daysforlife.com. That's 40daysforlife.com. The left obviously has other much more blatant ways of encouraging cross-dressing and gender bending and instilling confusion in people's minds, but none of those other efforts will be as effective as even this one little 2-minute scene in CoComelon. Because this is where they really mold the next generation into whatever twisted shape they want them to be. It's with a show like this, targeting children in this age range, planting seeds in very young minds that are not capable of any sort of skepticism or critical analysis. Now, meanwhile, as this is all going on, the corporate media is busy this week attacking the few kid shows that don't engage in this kind of perverse brainwashing. The New York Times has a lengthy article criticizing both Bluey and our very own Chilla on our Bentkey children's entertainment app. And the crime that they're criticizing these shows for is the crime of portraying happy, well-adjusted families with attentive fathers. So here's the title of the article, just to give you an idea of where the writer's coming from. The title is "The Fantasy of the Fun TV Dad." Yes, because a fun dad who loves his kids and likes spending time with them is a fantasy. Now, it certainly is, we can assume, in the personal experience of feminist New York Times writers, but I don't know if it's a fantasy in general. The Daily Wire summarizes the article, quote, "NYT writer Amanda Hess noted in her article how in the first episode of Bluey, the archaeologist's father, Bandit, keeps house while his wife works outside the home. She describes Bandit as a fun dad who does housework too, that always plays with his kids. Hess views this portrayal as unrealistic, writing that his omnipresence is odd and striking. The writer goes on to describe how her own child is often staring at a screen while she takes care of household chores like laundry. Quote, "Bandit represents a parent freed of drudgery, one whose central responsibility is delighting his kids," Hess adds, claiming that parents don't play with their children in real life because they're too focused on other tasks. Hess has the same complaints about Bentkey's Chilla, which is about a homeschooling family with the dad, Chum Chum, serving as the children's instructor. She describes Chum Chum as a highly involved father and unrelenting jokester who rarely seems to have to work. Yes, well, it's important that the cartoon chinchilla has a more realistic work-life balance. It's odd to have an omnipresent dad. Now, she doesn't seem to have noticed that the main characters in cartoons generally tend to be omnipresent. Like, that's what makes them the main characters. Does Chilla need to have an episode where the dad gets in his car and drives to work and sits for 9 hours in a cubicle just to establish that this is also part of the daily routine? Apparently, Amanda Hess is not able to use her imagination on this point. Come to think of it, it's also odd that we never see any of these cartoon characters sleep. Are they always awake? Are they awake all the time? There should be at least one 7.5-hour episode where the characters just sleep the whole time, because that'll really help with the realism. And by the way, Hess also complains, of course, about the show featuring, quote, lessons about dead white people. Quoting from the article, "With Chilla, conservative parents can fulfill a fantasy of their own, combating the perceived indoctrination of public school by screening homeschool-themed content afterward, featuring lessons about dead white people and classic texts." So, this is what the media wants you to be worried about. While one of the most popular kids show franchises in the world has a cross-dressing boy dancing around the room for his gay dads. There certainly is not going to be any lengthy New York Times think piece about that, except perhaps maybe to praise it. But the criticism will go to the few shows left that show happy, normal nuclear families with normal parents and normal kids doing what happy, normal families do. Because there's nothing that these people hate more than normalcy. That's why they're just determined to destroy it. And to destroy your child in the process. And they will use whatever tools are available in that effort. Which includes, in fact, especially includes shows like CoComelon. And that's why we created Bentkey in the first place. And it's also why, if you have kids, you should sign up for it. And it's why Netflix and CoComelon are today, and should be literally, in the Bud Light sense, canceled. Thanks for checking out this video. If you'd like to listen to my full podcast on the go, you can check out The Matt Walsh Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.